Hi, and welcome to another episode of About the Authors TV. I'm your host, Jake Brown. Nothing less than masterly, Lee Smith brings to her work an ear for speech and voice that most other writers can only envy. The New York Times Book Review once mused of the revered author's work, while the Washington Post has written that reading Lee Smith's work is like coming home again, to find everything just as you remembered. Worn quilts on the brass bed, cat dozing in the most comfortable chair by the fire, peach cobbler in the oven. Beginning nearly 6 decades ago in 1968, when her first novel, Last Days of the Dog Bush's Bloom, hit stores, and has stayed a beloved part of literature ever since, with subsequent tales of everyday Appalachian life in Black Mountain Breakdown, Fancy Strut, Cakewalk, Oral History, Family Linen, the still celebrated Fair and Tender Ladies, where People magazine would write that in this book, Smith reins in her humor to listen to one voice, the joltingly clear sound of Ivy Rowe, whose passion for letter writing yields a poignant chronicle of enduring pride. The short story collections, Me and My Baby View the Eclipse and News of the Spirit, The Devil's Dream, Saving Grace, The Christmas Letters, The Last Girls, and On a Gate Hill, where Kirkus reviews found an authentic American saga, bittersweet as an Appalachian ballad, peopled with wonderfully vivid characters, so brilliantly constructed we never even notice the quilt-like artfulness of its design. It's one of those books you can either roam contentedly around for days or devour at once in a rush of pure pleasure. She's given fans the novella Blue Marlin, and Silver Alert is her most recent gift to shelves, with book lists concluding that Smith's novel is an incisive and heartwarming exploration of life's fragile phase. The legendary author is here today to talk about her beloved catalog and career. Lee, welcome to the show. Reflecting back and growing up in the small coal mining town of Grundy, Virginia, were you raised in that classic oral storytelling tradition of listening to mom and dad or grandpa and grandma telling stories on the front porch?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that my whole sense of story is really oral. It's in fact when I'm writing, it's like somebody's talking in my ear and I'm just writing it down. And consequently, I'm not typing, I'm still writing longhand when I'm writing fiction because it's the way that I just connect closer. It's a body thing. I'm still doing that. But I grew up, I had the most fortunate childhood in the world for somebody who was going to be a writer because I just grew up with stories all the time. My whole family were really big talkers. They were all in politics, they were big talkers, etc. The women too, so and my whole sense of a story, it's like I'm on the porch and I'm a child and they're all telling stories and they're drinking a little and we're on my grandmother's porch and I fall asleep. I'm an only child born late in life to them, so I get to go everywhere the grown-ups go, and I'm always in the presence of the stories, and they're telling all kinds of stories on this porch, and it's getting dark and I get tired and I'm falling asleep, and I always fall asleep in the arms of somebody that loves me, you know, listening to the stories, which went on and on and on. And so that's where I get my sense of story. And looking out from that porch, I can see across the creek, the little town itself, and these lights from the theater, as we called it, the Linwood Theater in the river, and they're just all multicolored and they're mysterious and they're beautiful. And somehow there's this sense of stories out there of all the people.
So much so that you named your memoir a dime store. How do you feel looking back on it now? The growing up around that center of a small town as you did filtered down into your writing style to come.
I grew up in the small town of Grundy, Virginia, and it's in that little part of Appalachia that's real close to West Virginia and real close to Tennessee, coal mining all the way. And I grew up in the heyday of mining and so on. But oddly enough, my own family, they were not in the mines; they were store owners pretty much. And so the different people in my family owned different stores in the town, and my own daddy owned the dime store. And so I grew up, at my house and at the dime store. The dime store was a really important part of all of our lives. But his family had been there been in that little town and area for years and years and years. And they were all there. I had so many aunts, so many uncles, so many cousins and people everywhere. And that was a big thing. And then other times I spent a lot of time in my daddy's dime store. And he had this kind of old-fashioned kind of dime store where, his office was up above the main floor, and it was fixed so that he could be up there, and people couldn't see him, but he could see out. And so he could look down on the floor of the dime store, and he could see what everybody was doing, anybody that was shoplifting, anybody that was doing anything, coming in and out. And I spent so much time up there in the office with him, looking out on the dime store and watching everybody. And I witnessed embraces, kisses, slaps, people being mean to their children. And one time I saw a woman steal a big old Philco radio and put it between her legs and go like this, all the way out the store. And I didn't tell on her. I was just dying to see if she'd make it. And she did. And I was just thinking, you go, lady, even though I'm my daddy's daughter. But it was a wonderful kind of childhood for somebody that was going to write stories, because I heard every kind of story in the dime store, witnessed all of these kinds of stories in progress, and spent a lot of time downtown across the street too, where my granddaddy was the county treasurer. And I heard a lot of stories over there, different kind of stories, who had done what and was sent to jail and all this kind of thing. And, so it was just the stories all over town. And it was a wonderfully fortunate place for a writer to grow up. Well, I'm a writer to whom place is very important. And this is a place that for me gave me many stories, just gave them to me, which was wonderful. Of course, you have to be paying attention, I guess. And I think that's one reason I used to wish I had sisters and brothers. I was an only child born late in life to parents who thought they'd never have a child. So I was always around the adults, and I was always in the presence of the story, because I was just where the adults were, and they were all talking, and they were big talkers. I'm telling you, my whole family and everybody else in town too. That's what they did.
For the writer trying to bring their own small town to life on the page for the first time, what are the secrets to describing with the same vivid detail you do all the small details that make the reader feel like they're living right there with the characters day in and out?
I think it's just to talk to people. Everybody has got so much to say, and they don't have enough listeners. We're short on listeners. And so just talk to people, just get them talking, and you will hear the most amazing stories. You really will. Just take time to listen to people. Old people, draw them out, ask them questions. And I was just always real interested in that. As I say, I was an only child, and I was around adults a lot rather than off with a gang of children, which I might have rather have been in a certain way. But for ultimately for my purposes, I really did hear a lot of stories and grow up hearing a lot of stories. I think what we've got to do is make the reader be there. And so what do we have to give? What do we have to give the reader so the reader can be there? We have to make the reader see it. So we have to tell about that mountain. We have to tell about the sky. We have to tell about the old car. We have to tell about, every single thing that we see. And it's just a kind of a thing of paying attention. But people can't be there in their minds unless we give them the stuff. We have to let them know exactly what that old man looks like. And we have to let them know what kind of room is he living in, and what is there, and what kind of shoes does he have, and just every kind of thing. Does he have any old pictures? What's there? We just have to give them everything that they need to be there too. Because that's why we read. We read in order to be somewhere else, to be in the world of the story. And so the writer just has to give them a sufficient world. And once you get that in your mind, then you're looking for what does make this space, what does make this place different from all. How can we put a reader there?
Now, is it true that you were already running your own small town newspaper before you even went out of high school?
A neighborhood newspaper named the Small Review. And my best friend and I copied, we wrote it out in longhand. We didn't anyway, we wrote each little thing out in longhand and took them door to door, and we even had editorials, like like Mrs. Ruth Boyd is real mean. She hits your hand with a pencil when you have your piano lessons. That was an editorial, which got Miss Ruth Boyd in lots of trouble. But I'm saying it's just, I started real young, just writing stuff and interacting with the community with it too, kind of in a way.
We understand you would actually write what would become your first published book, Last Day of the Dog Bushes Bloom, while still studying for your undergraduate degree at Hollins College. Did the idea for Susan's story first come out of a writing class assignment or on your own?
Because I was an only child, I was a very imaginative child. And I had, my daddy had built me a little writing house down by the river, which was behind their house. And I was always down there writing things and messing around. And I had, as a little child, I had all these different, a whole family of crawdads that were down there and a pet snake. And I had all kinds of things. I had a whole little imaginary world and a whole bunch of imaginary friends down there. And so I guess that first novel was about a child who was that kind of child, who was, a very imaginative, solitary child. And so that was the kind of the first, but I was always a child who was writing at the same time. So that's in the voice of that child, although the trouble in her own family is magnified because you got to have a plot, when you're writing fiction. But it was the kind of solitary, overly imaginative, very sensitive little girl living in a kind of a world of her own. Was that first narrator in that novel, and I wrote it in college. I sort of wrote a couple of stories from that point of view, and the point of view of this 9-year-old child. And I was close enough then that I could do that. I can't do it now. I can't do the 9-year-old child, but I could at that point. And so my writing teacher liked those stories, and he said, well, maybe you could expand this. Maybe you could write, some more. And so that's how that book came to be, that first book. Louis Rubin, and he is a writing teacher who has influenced an enormous number of people. In fact, he taught what I believe is one of the very first writing workshops in this country at Johns Hopkins before he came to Hollins College in Virginia, where I was. But he taught John Barth there at Johns Hopkins and William Styron. And then he got a job, luckily for us, at Hollins College, Women's College in Roanoke, Virginia. And he came and he was going to have the first graduate writing program, but he mixed it all up. He let undergraduates be in those workshops too. So from freshman year on, I was lucky enough to be in an actual writing workshop with graduate students, with seniors, with whoever just wanted to be in the writing workshop. I was in that workshop for 4 years, and it was amazing. And I just fell into that. Nobody has ever been so lucky. And another of our teachers was Mr. Dillard, who was a young teacher, and he, one of my best friends and roommate was married him. So that's Andy Dillard, the writer. So we were both in that class. A lot of writers turned out to have been in that class. It was just, again, it was luck. It was just luck, like growing up in Grundy.
It must have been quite something to see your first published book on store shelves right out of college. Did you feel like you were on the right professional path at that point?
It felt real good. It's all I ever wanted to do. What I loved to do was write. That's all I ever really wanted to do. I did understand that I probably wouldn't make a living doing it, because my daddy was always telling me that, and everybody was telling me that. So you're having a lot of fun, but now you can't make a living. You'll have to be a teacher or something. And I said, okay, I'll do that. I'll teach, I'll do whatever. So, but also I liked working on, student newspapers and that kind of thing. And I was a journalist for a while too, early on. So I always wanted to do something that had, I knew I had to make a living somehow. But I just was always writing,
Time magazine once suggested that you write to give shelter to your vulnerable characters, on display from very early on in your catalog. For instance, Crystal Spangler and Black Mountain Breakdown. Why have you felt compelled from early on in your career through present day to give voice to such characters? And specific to this story, was Black Rock based around a real town you'd grew up around? And was Crystal based on someone real that you knew in that town?
I'm getting much more serious by the time I get to writing Black Mountain Breakdown. And that is the first time I really used specifically Appalachian elements. Also, I'm known as an Appalachian writer largely now, and that's true. But it's the first time that I really used the mountains. And I used the sense of, I used the setting in a way that I had not before. And so that's a book. It's about how people can get trapped in their lives, particularly women. And it's a very serious kind of a book, and it ends up in a very, it doesn't give a lot of hope really quite at the end, and so on. But it's the first time I used all these Appalachian elements of place, the mountains themselves and the mountain people and the kind of people and so on. And so that was a really important sort of book to me. And my mother just had a fit. She thought, this is just awful. This is so depressing, But anyway, I was glad to get to that point. That's one reason that I have always so loved to write and continue to do it. It's just been a great pleasure to get to be so many other people, because when you are writing from the point of view of this girl, this woman who is, of course, very depressed and very caught in a life that she needs to get out of, that's who you are. And it's I think these were the first times, that maybe have been the first serious time when it was not me at all. She was a character, and I wasn't me at all. She was me. I was Crystal, who was not crystal clear at all, and who was trapped in a certain way in her life, in the way a lot of girls and women, and particularly in those earlier times I'm writing about, could be really trapped in their lives and in such a place. And so I was getting serious.
Fair and Tender Ladies was and remains one of your most celebrated works, and People magazine would write that in this book, Smith reins in her humor to listen to one voice, the joltingly clear sound of Ivy Rowe, whose passion for letter writing yields a poignant chronicle of enduring pride. How early on did you know you were going to tell such powerful passages of this story through letters, and did you write them in the headspace of Ivy's character?
I love to go to yard sales. I never miss a yard sale. I'll grind my car to a halt and stop. And so I had stopped at a yard sale one time up in the mountains, and there were these sisters, and they were selling off all the stuff, and their mother died. They were selling off the stuff and all the stuff in her house and everything. And one thing she had done was, clearly she had kept every letter that had ever been sent to her, and they were all carefully put in little bundles, and they were, and I was saying, well, now what is that? And it's, that's her letters. And I said, well, what are they about? She saved all those letters. We don't know, so they weren't going to read them. But they had all these boxes of letters at this yard sale. And I said, but she saved them, and she wrapped them each one so carefully. Aren't you curious at all about what all these letters are? The hundreds and hundreds of letters. And they said, no. And they just looked at me, and I said, well, I want to buy them. And they said, I said, how much are they? And they kind of looked at each other, and they said, well, $20. And I said, all right, I'll give you 10. So I bought them, and I took them home, and I read them, and I started reading them. And it wasn't that they said so much, but there were so many of them that I did kind of begin to get the idea of a woman who had been so lonely in her life, but had sent these letters, and what the letters themselves had meant. And so suddenly I knew I wanted to write a whole novel that would be letters, that would be Ivy. That's my main character. It's her letters over time, and what the writing of the letters means, the expression of the actual self, the real self. And to me, there's nothing like writing. Like real writing. I still write like longhand. I'm writing the book in longhand about the woman that's writing her letters, and I'm writing it all in longhand. And also, I have to say, you can never separate the book that you write from what you were going through at the time when you were writing it. And what happened to me was, I had just started writing that. I wanted to write about Ivy Rowe, this woman in the mountains, and tell her whole life through letters, sort of. And I had some things made up about her and what she was going to do, and she was going to live in a coal camp and do this and do that. But then all the stuff I just started happening in my own real life, which was that suddenly my husband left. Suddenly I had these 2 boys. I didn't have a real job. I'm taking care of them. I'm looking for a job, but I'm writing this book. And at the same time, my mother got really sick, and then my mother's dying. Right. And so I had to keep going back up to the mountains in Virginia from North Carolina, where I'm a single mom writing this book. And so suddenly everything got real serious for me. And Ivy, the character, goes through every damn thing. I mean, it's like everything that was happening to me is sort of reflected, I think, in the intensity of the life that I had already kind of sketched out and imagined for her. But somehow what I was going through, and somehow having that book to write just saved me during this very difficult period in my own life. It was about 3 years I was writing that book. Oh, and my son Josh was being diagnosed with schizophrenia, okay, too. And so I'm writing this book, and all this terrible stuff is happening. And Ivy Rowe, that's the main character. She's going through a lot of stuff too, but she just gets stronger and stronger. And so she's holding me up, and I'm writing the book, and it's Ivy and me, and we're going, we're hanging on, and we're going through all that. And so somehow I've never had quite that sensation ever again, and I made it, I made it finally. I made it. And Mama died right I couldn't end the book until Mama died, and then I ended the book. And then that was the burning of the letters, but from Ivy. But I mean, I've just had this complete emotional thing going with that. And I think some of that somehow did probably get into the book. I don't know, but it's real funny. Like, I have had, over the years, I have had over 20 babies have been named Ivy Rowe, and their mothers have written to me because there's a birthing thing, and a mountain birthing thing in there. But it's a book that, I don't know, as I was falling apart, Ivy was getting stronger and stronger, and it helped. I don't know. She held me up, and I think in a certain way she as a character and that book have held other women up too, because I've heard that again and again. And as I say, I have all these little Ivies, and I get Christmas cards, from their families. And here's Ivy, now she's a year older, and here's Ivy, and here's Ivy, and here's Ivy, which has been so wonderful. It is really about a woman's life, and it's not glossy, it's the hard stuff. And and I'm just forever thankful to Ivy for coming to me in that moment when I so needed her. I don't know where Ivy came from, but she came out of that period in my life, which was hard and meant a whole lot. And I think that does go into the work. There's no way it doesn't.
We look forward to bringing you Lee Smith full episode on an upcoming season on a streaming network. But for now, we're excited to talk with her about her latest releases. Your latest release, Silver Alert, has a very funny origin story, if you'd share it with us.
Well, this is a book that's coming out in, I can show you. Let me show you. Da-da-da-da. Here it is. It's set in Key West also. And I had a lot of fun writing this book. And I can tell you a little story about the writing of it, how it came to be. And we've gone to Key West, my husband and I, many, many, many times too. After that first time with my parents, I have gone to Key West. I can't tell you how many times. But anyway, my husband and I too have gone. And several years ago, we were leaving Key West, driving the famous Route 1, which goes from Key West all the way up the brilliant and beautiful Keys, up toward Miami. And we see this arc thing that goes over the whole road, and it says Silver Alert. And then it has the make and model of a car, and then it says call this number. And I said, what is that? And Hal said, well, I don't know. It's across the whole Route 1. And he said, but it might be like Amber Alert, You know, Amber Alert, when a girl goes missing, they put Amber Alert over the highways. He said, I bet that's it. That's a Silver Alert. And he says, probably an old guy. You're in Florida. You know, probably some guy's gotten the keys to his car and he's missing or something like that. And so, and then he said, but wait, look at the car. And the car was a Porsche Carrera. And so we're thinking, whoa. So we're kind of interested, but we don't think about it again until miles later, there it is again. And we're thinking, oh, he's still out there. Yeah, you know. And so we start making up a whole history about him, who he is and where he's going. And then by the time we see it for the third time, my husband is just banging the wheel. He's saying, you go, you know, he's really excited. And we've made up a whole scenario, and we have decided that he's got the mani-pedi girl from assisted living with him. And he's found the keys to his car and he's making a break for it. And so we had so much fun, but turns out that's the plot of the book. That's what the book is. So then I just wrote that novel. So that's what's coming next.
What's most inspiring about rising to write anew each day? And what's coming up on the creative horizon beyond your latest release you might be able to tell us a bit about?
I'm sort of back on stories again right now. I've been working on several and wanted time to work on a few more. So yeah, people's lives. You know, but the music you mentioned, I have loved. I don't know. There may be a slight musical thing coming up. I'm not quite sure. I'm never quite done with that. You know.
What are you proudest of when you look back over the entire expanse of your catalog and the Appalachian people, history, and traditions that you've kept alive within the pages of your writing?
I am very proud that I have been able to do that. I think I'm so lucky to have grown up where I grew up in the mountains and to hear the stories and know the people that I knew and know. And I'm very happy to have been able to bring these stories to a lot of other people and to bring, you know, the music too, and just to have brought this world. And it's been, you know, it's nourished me and it still does. And I'm just very happy to have been a part of it. And you know, there are a lot of things that need correcting, and there are a lot of things that still need correcting. And a number of our Appalachian writers, you know, Silas Hash, Ron Rash, et cetera, are on to that. We have a wonderful, wonderful group of Appalachian writers at this point. And there's a lot that needs to be done, a lot that needs to be written about. And I'm just very happy to be a part of all that. And there's a whole lot of us out there writing and that really need to be read. I mean, all I can say to any reader is thank you. Thank you so much. You know, that's it, because I'm such a reader myself. I'm never not reading a book. Anytime you see me, one thing I'm thinking about is what's going to happen next in my book. I'm always reading a book, and I hope, I know there are other people too, so I'm glad to give them some material.
Finally, why do you still favor writing all of your novels in longhand with all the technology that's available to authors today?
I think because what really interests me about writing at all is not so much what happens, it's the people. And it's the people, and I'm often writing not in my own voice and not in the third person voice, but in the voice of the character. I'm writing first person from the point of view of a serpent handling believer, or from the point of view of a country singer, or from the point of view of all these people, not myself. And it has allowed me to live many, many lives. It's been a great pleasure. And somehow writing longhand makes it even more physical. You know, it really is, I am them. Say, when I'm writing from their point of view, they're writing. It's like they're writing through me. And I, more often than not, I am writing through the voices of characters, not myself. And that's how I wrote so many of these books. Like each section will be from the point of view of a different character, like in The Devil's Dream, and so many of these books. And so somehow the physicality of it, the voice is just coming through in that way. And I don't know, I guess it's because I just started out like that. And I'm sure somebody who starts now only on a computer, you know, that's what they do. But for me, the physicality is, and it's also, I can hear them talking in my head. You know, I can hear a gruff old country musician's voice, or I can hear, an old lady, or I can hear whoever it is that's telling me, a bitchy country club lady. I don't know who, but whoever's telling me the story, I can hear it and I can just write it down. And so that's just been my method. Everybody has a different method, I guess.
Lee, thanks for all you've given to literature over the years and for taking out time to be on About the Authors TV.
Thank you. Thank you.